My Govan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I am Araki Galadirthan, the head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back to Divide and Conquer as we continue on with the faction overviews for version 2.2. This video is recorded on... what's the date today? 19th of August? It helps just for future reference. The 18th of August. And this relates to version 2.2 with Angmar. Which is why we're up here in the north. So, kicking off straight away, what's the size of your realm and your army like? Well, you only get 3 regions, Shadun, Latash, and Khan Dum, which has this nice snowy effect, courtesy of RK, which is always very good. And so it's perpetual winter here, which is great. But outside of that, you don't really get anything else. Your army is pretty much just trash at the start of the game. A couple of units of Orc trash in your capital. Some more Orc trash in Shadun. And even more Orc trash filling out in Latash, where your generals are all knocking around as well. So you haven't got a very big army. There's a couple of Ruodawa units in that fort there. And there's Chief Hun Vorn in that fort there. But your army's not very large, and neither is your nation. So, your leader capital, Khandum is of course your capital, and your leader is in there, Overlord Agendawa the Merciless. And this is what he looks like. Now this model is unique to Agendawa. This is not what your faction leader will look like if Agendawa dies, this is just what Agendawa will always look like. That's his portrait, of course, and he comes with Temple Wards, which are the Mordor Dark Numenorian unit, which you cannot train, so he will never have free upkeep, I'm afraid. Of course, Agendawa is from the War in the North video game, and we did break away from our tradition of trying to not use things from that game, and we gave Agendawa. Now, of course, the suggestion is that he has been sent by Sauron to the north to try and muster up the forces of Angmar, which seemed a little more fitting given that Angmar as a nation is one of the most unrealistic. Because, of course, by the time of the Third Age, the Orcs and the men of Ruodawa, for example, in the north, were all but obliterated. So Angmar is the biggest stretch, really, that everyone seems to just overlook. So we didn't feel really that bad about chucking Agendawa in. The faction heir is Chief Hun Vorn, as I say, who is also custom. There he is. He, of course, is a Wraith. And so to replicate that, he has Barrow-wights as his bodyguard. So he is a Wight, or a Wraith. He even says that he's a Wraith. That's pretty cool, isn't it? And courtesy of Hummingbird, he has glowing blue eyes on the campaign strategy map, which is nice. Very good units, these two. You should try and use them as much as you can. Other custom bodyguards include Morholt, who also has a unique campaign strategy model, unique to him. He is a hillman, or a man of Ruodawa, and he has the archers from there to cover him. He's one of your most useful generals because he is ranged. And he gets, as I say, a few units of Ruodawa men in his fort with him. Otherwise, the two other Orc generals, Drangu in Shadun at the foot of Mount Graham, he has just your standard bodyguard, and as does the gentleman in Latash, Ugduff. Both representing standard Orc general designs. Now, as I say, if Agendawa, Hun Vorn, and Morholt all die, your faction leader will just look like a normal general. There'll be nothing to differentiate him, because you can't have both. It's one or the other. Either unique individual generals, or a unique faction leader, whoever it is. So, you have to put up with that, I'm afraid. Your diplomat, of course, comes from Khandum, from the structure where most of them come from, which is always represented by a circle. These are, like, unique buildings. And in this case, it is the Barad Haleg, which just means Ice Tower, which again is a bit fictional, but it was the best thing we could think of. And courtesy again of the Elite Dwarf, this time the Ice Tower is pretty much represented by the large peak next to Khandum. So that's your army. So in terms of rebel expansion, you can head west and south, and that's it. You can't go east because you've got to go through the Misty Mountains unless you wish to break the alliance and attack them. Otherwise, you've got to go south. Nokvaraclaw is the nearest, Angsul to the west, Gobadrai and Athelin. These are all ripe for the taking. Of course, this is on turn 2, so the turn 1 auto expansion has already taken place, and these regions are rebel. These are free for your conquest. So that's your options in terms of rebels, and then you obviously are going to knock on to your neighbours. In the south you will come under fire from the northern Dunedain. They will be reaching out towards you. Of course, eventually the dwarves of Ered Luin will make their way east. They take quite a while to do that, so I would recommend trying to rush them to shut them down, but others may have different plans. But they will make their way to you from from their east, your west. Imladris won't really ever pose a threat. They're just there as a challenge to take out if you really want to, but they never really expand. They might get peak 3 settlements, but nothing more than that ever. So it's only really the Northern Dunedain and Ered Luin you've got to worry about early doors. And then later on, of course, once you break through the shell of the Dunedain, you'll come to Bree. And indeed, if you make it through the dwarves, then Mythond will have some words to say. Other than that, though, allies are the Misty Mountains and I believe Mordor. Yes, and that's it. So you're not allied to Dunland, neither are you at war with them, so they're a bit of an unknown. You could go either way with them, and the same with Enedwythe, but that's talking way later. So those are your diplomatic standings. Economy buildings and your blacksmith. You only get a tier 3 blacksmith, so you're only going to be upgrading twice for the lower tier units, once for the mid tier, and maybe not at all for your elites. You, of course, are an orc nation, so you can't get the highest tier of castle. You can only go to castle. You can't get strongholds. You can, however, get all the town levels. In guilds, you get the standard Warriors Guild, or Fighter's Pit as it's called for the Orcs. Now, the Orc one does not increase melee skill, it only increases experience bonus to troops. And you'll be able to get both of those because you, unfortunately, don't get the third tier. It's reserved for the truest followers of Sauron. And that's the only guild you get, though, I'm afraid. Do remember that the garrison quarters, in order to get a garrison, you need to build the garrison quarters, the armory. And it takes away some money from the settlement you build it in, but it gives you a garrison. It also boosts your law bonus, as you saw there as well. Now remember that without building that, you simply will not get a garrison. Even in unique settlements. I'm fairly certain that we have set it up that only the AI will get bonus garrison troops in unique settlements. You, as a human player, will always need to build an armory to get them. So that's how you get to that. And the other point to note, as you may have seen in Shadoon, is the Rhuda camp. Hillman camp. It's actually available in the building roster. There it is. This is where the men of Rhuda now come from. So no longer are they available just in Rhuda. They are now available everywhere. You just have to build their separate barracks. And this was done because we wanted to make them feel a larger part of the Angmar roster and help to differentiate Angmar by having a real 50-50 split with Hillmen and Orcs. And it's not really 50-50, you get a lot more Orcs than you do Hillmen, but the Hillmen are your better troops until the late game, so certainly try to utilise them. And you can see you get Hillmen, Axemen, Pikemen and Raiders from the first tier, and you get the Savages, the Nobles and the Archers from the second tier. Oh no, Axemen, sorry, the Axemen are the Axemen used to be called Savages, they're now called Axemen. So they come in there. So the second tier only gives you the Archers and the Sword and Shield one, which is called the Nobles. But other than that, that's about it really. Standard Orc Nation otherwise, Warg Breeder, Practice Range, Barracks, all those kind of things. So your archery units, your barracks and your riders are separated in different buildings. So then on to scripts. I'm afraid that at current, in version 2.2, there is no script for Angmar. So yes, the Witch King is not going to come and join you. That is not in the game yet. You'll have to wait for a later version for that. You actually, unfortunately, have no scripts at all. However, a script doesn't necessarily define a faction. It adds some interesting features, but the campaign can still be fun without them. And Angmar's is certainly quite a good one because you're up against a shed load of enemies. And so you're not too concerned about script. But there are none, I'm afraid. So there may possibly be other scripts coming in later when the next version is released and Gundabad stands alone as its own nation. But Angmar, Gundabad and Misty Mountains may have some sort of trio script going that Lord of Links has put forward, which is quite interesting. But at the moment, there are none. So key map changes from the last version, which was what, 1.2? I always forget. The two regions up here that used to form the Ice Bay of Foreshell, I think this is the Ice Bay of Foreshell, but anyway, the Forrodwaith regions are gone. They were both completely useless and did nothing, so the northern one, its land was given over to the Wasteland region, this large rebel region that cannot be captured, even though it does have a town. It also, interesting point for you, the large region in the south is the same region. So if you were to capture that town, you would border nations who you should not border. Anyway, you can't capture that town. But this region here is also gone, and its land's given over to Oyolad and Fuerost. So those are the key changes there. Bari Donionach, which used to be all of this region, has now been broken up into the three, Fueros, Goberdrain, and the old Bari Donionach. That's about it, really. Well, Dol Bryn is new as well, but the Misty Mountains get that at turn 1, so they'll be in there. So that's the major changes from the start. Once you've taken Angsul, you've then got to go more southwesterly. You can't go north. Tips and difficulty. I've played as Angmar, actually, one of the few evil nations I have, and I rushed Ered Luin, and I would recommend that is probably the best way to do it, to take them out. The Northern Dunedain are very slow to expand, so you, as a player, don't need to worry about them too much. And Bree tend to not break through very easily, so I would rush Ered Luin, personally, and try and shut them down. The elves are so passive. They aren't actually passive, but their gameplay is still quite passive. And they will take a while to come and take you down if you do take Ered Luin. They're not very warlike. Other than that, though, I'm not really sure. I mean, scoop up some of the rebel regions here, but do note that Nokvaraklaw, Athelin, and Gobadrine are all villages, so they're not going to help you out very much in the early game. Places like Thuirost and Barketta are better for you. So it's up to you. It is up to you. But anyway, that is everything for the campaign side. Now we can go over to the battle map and see what their roster looks like. Welcome then to the battle map for Angmar. And the first overview look at their roster shows that you're not going to be shooting very many people, but otherwise you've actually got quite a balanced roster with an awful lot of focus on the early game. As you can see, a lot more choices in the rough guesstimation of when the barracks event kicks in. Most of your units come in before that. There is also one other unit that unfortunately just didn't fit, and there's no need to really go over them again because I'm fairly certain they were in the Misty Mountains overview, but you get Snagger Stalkers as well. So you do get one unit of utter garbage trash on the game just to die, but and then the rest of your army kicks in. So there is kind of a tier before this, but as I say, it's only the Snagger Stalkers, and I'm fairly certain I covered them in the Misty Mountains overview, so I'm not overly concerned. Although I may not have done. But anyway, they only have one attack, one defense, and one charge, so I wouldn't worry about them too much. You get 2 units of trolls, as you can see up the back there as well. We'll cover in a moment, but we'll start down here. So it's a bit difficult with your early tier because there's quite a variety, or there's a large varying degree of change amongst the stats of your early tier units. So even though I've put them all in this same sort of line, there's like 3 different grades almost at this tier. So we'll start off with the unit that has the statistically worst stats of your melee forces, which is the Orc Fellas. Which is interesting because I always really feared them, but now I realise that even though they're effective against armour, they're actually just garbage. They only have a 2 defence stat, and that is armour and defence skill, so they'll be killed by arrow fire very easily. Their charge is 5, which is a nice bonus, but then their attack is only 3, and even with an effective against armour boost, that's still not that threatening. There are 251 of them though, so that is a factor of course, but they're just not as good as I thought they were. Like most orcs, they get a bonus fighting in snow. Interestingly, they get a bonus fighting in forest here, and they don't like deserts, nor do they like grasslands. They prefer where they can hide from arrows and be protected with the winter. Their morale is poor, their morale response is poor. This is a feature of orcs as well, but they do tend to have good stamina across the board, and they're dirt cheap at 350. Now, supporting your Orc Fellas and units that you're going to get everywhere we'll start with first are the Goblin Band. Now, these are actually quite good, given that they're called Goblin Band. They have an 8 total defense, which is really very good. That's what I mean. This unit had a 2 defense, and this one has an 8 defense, but they're in the same tier because of the way this roster works out. But their attack is terrible at 2, and their charge is terrible at 2. So these people will survive quite well, but they won't kill anyone. So always a bit of a playoff. Again, poor morale response. They get a bonus against mounts, though, because they are a spearman. And finally, well, even though they're not a militia tier, but we'll cover them because they're the other available everywhere unit, or they're not a melee unit, sorry, are the Goblin Archers. Their melee and charge, again, is terrible. Same is, in fact, it's identical to the Goblin Band, but their defense is lower. There are less of them, but they do have a 2 missile attack. And this is going to be the main archer unit you get for the entire start of the game. This is why Morholt, your general, the Rudauer general, is so useful to you, because he is the best archer unit you'll get for nigh on 70 turns. Whereas the Goblin Archers are just terrible. They're only 1 attack stat better than Snagger Archers, so they're not really very good. But they are cheap at 410. Their total defense being 5 does give them a little bit of a boost and a standout, because they will survive a bit better than early tier trash, but not very well. So do watch out. You don't really have any archer options in the start of the game. Very melee heavy. But now we come to the men of Rudaur that you can train before the barracks event. And again, these people's stats line up somewhere in between these two. But we'll start with the Hillmen. Hillmen are actually, now that we look at it, a worse version of the Goblin Band. They have less men, they have the same attack and charge, and they have less defense. The only boost that you get with them is that even though the morale is broken down into poor and poor, it is slightly higher for the Hillmen. And that is it. They're a mercenary unit, which is why you can't see how much they cost. But as you look at them now, actually, there's no real reason to get them over Goblin Band. And we need to change that, really. We need to make them at least a little bit better, because otherwise they're just pointless. They're a more costly version of these, but they're worse than them. So get the Goblin Band if you can. Then you start to get units that actually matter, and we'll start with the pikemen, because these will be the core of your Rudaran army. Because, of course, pikemen are OP. And these guys look really good, I think. They're simple, but I think they look nice. Especially with their just plain pole with a bit of a stake on the end of it. Being their pike. They have a 3 attack, but of course it's a pike. So multiply that by 3 and it's more likely the real stat. So we're about 9, which is nice for a entry tier. Their defense is 8, which is very good for a pike unit, actually. Very good indeed. And their morale is average. Morale response is average. Of course they get a bonus against mounts. They're pikes. They're really very good. For 520 gold coins, they are very cost effective, and I'd recommend trying to train them as often as possible. Secondly, we've got the Rudaur Axemen, or thirdly, sorry. This is a proper strike infantry unit. Their attack is 7, considerably better than the fellas, 2.33333 times better. They're effective against armor, which is very, very nice, and their charge bonus is 6, which is also good. But the better thing about them is that when they arrive at the enemy, they'll actually survive, as their defense is also 7 and not 2. But do note that the bulk of that is made up in armor, so armor-piercing units will also do well against these people, and arrows will take these people down very easily, because their defense against arrows is only 4, not 7. They only cost 550 as well, which is quite good. So these two should be the real core of your army, with the pikes holding the line and the axemen attacking on the sides. And then standing just behind your line is the only javelin unit that you get, the Rudaur Raiders. These people have a 5 melee attack, which is quite good when they're finished, which is a sword and board. They have a defense again of 8, which is very nice. Their javelin does 9 damage. And that is, you get 3 javelins per man, 55 meter range and average accuracy. Their morale is average, their morale response is average, but at least that's better than poor. So the only anomaly and what really needs looking at and fixing are that the Hillmen are worse than the Goblin Band and likely cost more. So we'll change them up for the next version, but for this version, I would just skip over those unless you have no other options. But anyway, there we are. So that's your first tier. But there are a next set of units that you'll get before the barracks event kicks in. Now, do note again, disclaimer as always, that this is just a rough line that splits the units by their stats. There is then a suggestion that these units will be barracks event only and these units will be before, but that's not always the case. And certain units may be available before, even though their stats place them later. So it's not based on the barracks event, this line or this gap, it's based on their stats. But anyway, the second tier before the barracks event, certainly, contrary to what I've just rattled on about, are the Halberdiers, Marauders, and Scourge Raiders. The Marauders are the first Orc unit that is doing quite well, but as you'll note, we could have put the Rudaur units up at this tier as well, because these Marauders have a 5 attack and a 9 defense, which is almost identical to the Rudaur Raiders, who also throw a javelin. So it probably would make more sense to have most of the Rudaur units up in this tier as well. So there we are, we'll stand them on top of each other. There we are, better visual representation. So your early tier is actually considerably smaller. Anywho, so we'll start with the Marauders, as I say. We've taken a look at them already. They have slightly better morale than the lower tier Orcs. Their morale response is average as well. Same bonuses and negative effects. Defense of 9, a 5 attack, 3 charge. They're just good hold the line style units. Or because they have got axes and swords and a shield, they're good on the attack as well, so they're nice little all-rounders. 520 gold coins for 200 Orcs, which is quite good. Then they're supported by Halberdiers, who, every time I tell you that Halberdiers are OP, there's always someone who tells me, my god, they're not OP, he doesn't know what he's talking about, oh my god. But they are still slightly better with their animation than normal units are, but they're nowhere near as good as pikes. But their attack of 3 with the animation is more like an attack of 4 or 5. It's nowhere near as good as the pike, but it is still a little bit of a bonus because 2 orcs can attack the same man at once with ease. Their defense is 7, which is quite good for a halberdier unit, and they're also effective against armor, which always boosts halberdiers up a little bit. So quite a good unit. Very good defensively. Good if you can flank on the attack. And finally, the Scourge Raiders.
Slash and
Who speak very much like they're going to Scourge. They're effective against armor as well. They have an attack of 9 with a 7 charge and a defense of 14. Now these people are considerably good, but they're not as good as your elites. So they're kind of in a tier above, I suppose. It'd be better to put them there in the gap. Because I'm fairly certain you can train these before, but mostly they were in this tier because they're not as good as the units that we're about to see, but they're better than the units before, so I suppose that's a better place for them. Out there on their own. 14 defense, 9 of which is armor. So again, your nation is very good against armor, but armor is also the main threat to your nation. Armor and arrows, or armor piercing, sorry, and arrows. So nations like the Northern Dunedain who have armor piercing arrows are literally your worst nightmare. Their morale is good though, and their morale response is impetuous, so they'll do well against morale shocks like your general dying or being flanked or being hit in the rear, or lots of units around them dying, that kind of thing. Same negatives and effect and bonuses as the others, forest snow and desert grassland. You also now get your first warg and, well, your only warg and your first cavalry unit.
keep the wolves under control.
Warg riders. They have a nice attack of 7 and a good solid charge of 10 with a spear, which is always a nice bonus. Defense of 9. And remember that wargs are actually camels, so they will scare horses. They get a bonus specifically against the Northman cavalry unit, as we've covered, I think, in the Misty Mountain video, because they share this warg rider. So, excellent stamina, powerful charge. They're just very good cavalry. Yeah, they are pretty damn good cavalry, actually. Doesn't say what their secondary attack is. Maybe they keep the spear. Anywho. And then we come to your actual elites. There are 3, supported by an archer and a cavalry unit way over there. And we will start with the men of Rudau, the swordmen they're called. Not nobles. They used to be called nobles. They're now called swordmen. They have a nice defense of 19, an attack of 8, a charge of 4, and a recruitment cost of only 685, which is very good for those stats, actually. They are very solid sword and board units, and you should definitely use them where possible. And they also look very good, I think. Now, they're supported by 2 very, very famous units that people will always think of when they think of Angmar, the Witch Realm Marauders and the Witch Realm Pikemen. These 2 heavily armoured orcs. The Witch Realm Marauders have a 22 defense with 14 of it being in their armour, attack of 9 and a charge of 7. They're effective against armour and they frighten nearby enemy infantry. They are really good, and they only cost 800 gold coins. A unit of that kind of stat makeup that's frightening enemy infantry and AP for any other nation would be over £1,000 gold coins. Sorry. So very, very good unit indeed, with very good morale and good morale response. They're supported with pikemen, or the pikemen will help them. They are just amazing pikemen. A 6 attack, and if you factor in the pikeman bonus, that's more like an 18 attack, one of the highest attacks, in fact, in the game. When you consider the animation. Defense of 17, which is very good for a pike unit as well. Now, charge bonus is only 4, because it's rare that you attack with pikes. Their morale is very good, and their morale response is good. So, again, for only 830 gold coins, they are very, very useful. And these 2 should form the... or whenever possible, always train these 2 units. They will win the campaign for you. The Marauders are particularly useful because in the late game you are likely to face Erod Luin and Erebor, who are both heavily armoured dwarven infantry nations, and the Marauders will make very light work of that dwarven armour with their 9 armour-piercing attack. So, very key unit in the late game. The archers then are the last and only other archer that you get, the Rudau archers, the bodyguard of Morholt. They have a melee attack of only 5, and their missile attack is also only 5. They're not really actually that good. Their stats are more like there, I'm afraid. Their recruitment cost is only 680, though, but the missile attack of 5 is enough to keep the enemy harassed and actually doing damage. Obviously, that's only 1 below human rangers, so that is a really good missile attack, but it's not an amazing missile attack, considering this is the only other archer unit that you get. Their range, 170, that's average really, and 24 arrows per man. They're not really very good. You're never going to win any archery battles. You're always going to have to close the distance with your large army of infantry and support of some cavalry units. And speaking of cavalry units, we've then got the Ruhrauer cavalry, who are basically swordmen on the horse. 15 total defense, slightly worse than their counterpart on foot. Same armor, just worse defense skill because they're on a horse. It's very hard to defend on a horse. Their attack is 6, their charge is 8, which is good for cavalry, and their secondary attack is also 8. So, as you say, they're just swordmen on a horse. But they're a very good cavalry unit. They are a very useful cavalry unit. Of course, they only come from the Ruhrauer barracks. Oh, and I didn't mention they come from the upgraded one, sorry. So you get these 3 units in the upgraded one, and you get all the ones below in the downgraded one. So that's the other cavalry unit that you get everywhere, because the last one is AOR, so you'll only get it in one place. But as we come then to our Uber tier, it is of course taken up by trolls. So you start with cave trolls. Cave trolls, of course, are infantry. They are not cavalry, so they will be able to man battering rams, climb siege ladders, climb siege towers, stand on walls, all of the above. They are not affected, or they are not... It's not easier to kill them with spears or pikes. It is easier to kill them with armor-piercing, ballistae, and arrows. That's how you kill cave trolls. They have 4 hit points, which means you need to kill them 4 times, and their defense is 29 anyway, so it's going to be a challenge. They have an attack of 35 and a charge of 10. Do note, though, that you don't need to do enough damage to kill them 4 times. I'm fairly certain that the hit point system works by each time a hit point is taken off, that's it, it stays off. So the longer the battle goes on, the more damage they will have taken, and the more likely they will to die. They are skilled against other cavalry, which is always something people often overlook. They're good at killing cavalry. They cannot run away, even unless you tell them to, because their morale is locked. And they're not armor-piercing, though, so... but their attack is 35 anyway, so what does it matter? They also have the ability to knock units back, which obviously people know. Everyone knows about trolls by now. I don't know why I cover them in so much detail. The snow trolls have the added bonus that they frighten nearby enemy infantry. Oh, so do the cave trolls, but the word infantry is missing. So, that's interesting. I've never seen that before. So they both frighten nearby enemy infantry. They're both skilled against mounts. The snow trolls just cost an awful lot more, and for that you get 2 more hit points, roughly 10 more defense, or 7 more defense, sorry, and an attack, and again 7 more on the attack, with 3 better charge. So they are better, but they cost more, and their upkeep is very high. But these are just excellent infantry units. They're not very good at holding the line because they can't actually hold a line. But they're really good, obviously, on the attack. But they will disrupt your own units, and they will do damage to your own units if they get caught in the maelstrom, so watch out for that. And finally, we come to the Guardians of Khan Dum. These people used to be dismounted, and you'll all be saying, where's the dismounted Guardians of Khan Dum? Well, they're now on a horse.
Serve the Witch King now.
And they are men of Ruhrauer in the heavy plate of Angmar, and they come only from Khan Dum, as I say. But they are really very elite cavalry. A 27 total defense, which is very high. Attack of 9 and a charge of 7. But do note they've not got a spear, so their charge is slightly dampened because of that. But they are effective against armor again, and they frighten nearby enemy infantry again. So your army is not only scaring every enemy infantry unit it comes across, but it's then also making mincemeat of their armour. So no real threats from the dwarves playing as Angmar. The problem with Angmar is that you get completely surrounded and attacked by so many foes you can't get your elite armour-piercing units out. But when you can, they do well. And the Guardians of Khan Dum are very good for that. But as I say, these guys are really rare. Their recruitment is slow, their replenishment is slow. I think they take 3 turns to recruit. Their replenishment is likely in the 15 or 20 turn mark. They cost 1,250. Their upkeep will be somewhere in the region of 600 to 700, I should imagine. And they only come from one place, so they're really going to be few and far between. You're not going to have an army of them. So then finally, the last unit to discuss is, of course, your bodyguard.
I am ready to command.
And there they are, in all their glory. They are a sword and board unit, as you can see. No special traits. Attack of 9, which is good though, and a 22 defense, which is solid. They're a dependable bodyguard, but I wouldn't put them out there as one of the best bodyguards. Their stats are good, but they don't have armor piercing. They don't scare enemies. They don't have a javelin or a horse or bows. They're just standard sword and shield defensive warriors. They're probably, I think they're better than Mordor's bodyguard though, so you've always got that. And that's it. That is the Angmar roster. So very infantry focused, with a little bit of a twinge toward heavy infantry in the late game. You are very good against armor throughout, with armor piercing options at almost every tier except the militia and trash tiers. but then armor piercing in each stage thereon afterwards. So you're not too much trouble against elite enemy nations like the High Elves, who you will face, like the Dwarves, who you will face. But the problem is that you will probably be overrun, because the enemies are everywhere, and they're out for your blood. So there we are, that's it. So now we'll get rid of that and get rid of that, and hand over to the AI, who will now fight a battle for us against whoever is next. Now I didn't show the colour on the floor, unfortunately, but there's some pretty big giveaway from the banner carrier there about who we are fighting next. There's a couple of cavalry units, some catapults. The AI, whenever you do it, sell it to auto build an army in the custom battle selector, it always gives siege equipment. I don't really know why. Maybe it's a hint. Maybe I'm not building enough of it in my campaigns. But there's the golden banner flying aloft on the edge of each battalion. A bit of a brown theme going on, so it can only, of course, be one nation, Dunland. You might have seen the crow on the banner, and that is, of course, the symbol of Dunland. Crowbine from Dunland. There's their catapult crew firing into our AI army as it shuffles around and makes bad decisions. Of course, the men of Ruidau have an awful lot in common with the men of Dunland in terms of roster, so it would be interesting if you had a full Ruidau roster versus Dunland and see who fares best. And there we are, their lines have met. Witch Realm Pikemen getting thrown all about, so they're in all sorts of carnage here as the Dunlanding warbands smash into our front line. Wolf's Pikes moving in on the Snow Trolls. Again, Pikes don't get a bonus against Trolls. I mean, Pikes are just good anyway, so they are good to use against Trolls, but they don't get a specific bonus, so do note that. Don't throw them in thinking, oh, they're going to be excellent against these Trolls, because they won't. They'll just be normal. Eisenmach Axemen are moving off to shut down our cavalry before it gets a charge off. As are the Chieftain's Bodyguard. There's the Bodyguard of Dunland. One of the best bodyguard units, actually. Little known fact about Dunland. They've got one of the better bodyguard units. Some cavalrymen moving in there. Oh, Druidine, hunters, who are only available as mercenary units. You can't actually train them. But in the custom battle selector, Enedwaith and Dunland can both train them if you ever want to play with them. But in the campaign, you'll need to train them as mercs. Their catapults getting some good shots in. Our Ruidau pikemen holding back. Of course, Ruidau and Dunland, as I say, visually, they are almost identical. So it's difficult to see them in the fighting. Eisenmach Raiders have charged onto our marauders on that flank, and that is basically it. Oh, and there's some berserkers in there as well. So there we are. So Dunland will be the next overview. I do hope you've enjoyed this one. I look forward to reading your comments about Angmar and seeing what you think. But until we speak again, dear friends, Navar na den Pedamad Melodine, and farewell. Oh, and our general didn't die, which is a win. He normally does. Stray catapult bolts, normally. Farewell.